This is Colin Dixon with nScreen Media, and I'm speaking with Will Law, who is Chief Architect at Akamai. And Will, you gave a fascinating presentation at Akamai Edge last month. And I wanted to follow up with a couple of things from that presentation that I think SVOD providers and online video, online TV providers can actually do something about right now to help boost costs and reduce costs and improve quality. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was changing the way they do the encode cycle, because right now they're usually using fixed profiles, but you think that they can do a lot better than that. Tell us how they can improve that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are stuck with fixed bitrate ladders, which was the legacy encoding solution from 5 to 10 years ago, where you picked a set of bit rates, you applied them to all your content, with animation, be it sports, be it drama. So at a very first level, if people re-encode today and simply pick the right content category, they can probably get a 10 to 50% reduction in the size of their video assets, and hence the volume that they're delivering as well, purely by just categorizing their content appropriately. The next step down would then be per title encoding, which is really starting to make its way through the encoding companies today, which is where you look at each asset individually and you pick a bitrate ladder and a codec choice that is tied to the activity that's inside that scene. And that's giving people real world savings of 30 to 40%. And notice that we haven't changed the codec. We're still AVC, H.264. We're simply encoding it in a more intelligent way than you may have encoded that asset 2 or 3 years ago.
And so how would I figure out, I mean, obviously if I have sport or something with a lot of action, then that profile would probably keep a lot more information. So the compression would be a lot lighter. But if it's talking heads a lot, maybe a rom-com where there's not a lot of action, then I will pick a profile that's a bit more aggressive. Is that how it works? Yeah,
encoding is a trade-off between quality and the number of bits you want to allocate to the top.
Of course.
To get supreme quality. So for your choice, assuming you want a pretty consistent quality threshold and you don't want pixelation or motion blur, you're going to have to devote more bits to scenes which carry higher activity, which is typically sports. You know, panning shots in sports are some of the worst. So you might allocate a bitrate ladder that for your 720p or 1080p representation for your sports content is going to have more bits than your talking head or your drama. And again, these are well-known and well-studied solution sets today. So there are solutions that can definitely lower your cost based on an analysis of the content. And then the next step down would be scene aware. So instead of saying, well, my movie's this title and in its 2-hour duration, you know, an action movie contains scenes of intense activity and then scenes which are just talking heads. So the next step down, as you know, Netflix led the way, and people are starting to catch up with them, is to look at the scene cuts independently and modify your encoding for the activity level in the scenes. And that's the more sophisticated level of encoding that's happening today.
I've been hearing about companies that are using AI to help identify that, to do that scene by scene. So is that possible to do? Let's say you're encoding a massive library that you've just purchased. That's pretty difficult to do by hand, scene by scene. So do these AI systems really work?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's saving you money. You know, Netflix put out some excellent blogs on this. They did the brute force computation where they took an asset and encoded it 10,000 different ways, literally. And then they did that for a few assets, and then they used machine learning to go back and make a prediction that if I have an asset that looks like this, based on all these brute force solutions that I've implemented, how can I predict what would be a better ladder? So all this, it's really not feasible to explore the tree in a brute force way for most companies, but there are machine learning solutions today that can make good predictions about what your ladder should be.
Very good. So the second thing I wanted to talk to you about is the new codecs, the Hevc VP9 codecs. And I'm sure that companies are out there thinking about these, thinking that they can reduce their bandwidth dramatically. Now, sure, if they're going to do 4K, they probably need to do something like that if they're going to have, if they're going to deliver to a realistic number of providers, but is endpoints rather. But is there any reason for somebody who's just doing H.264 regular 1080p or 720? Is there any reason for them to think about doing HEVC?
Absolutely, there's value. HEVC gives you lower bitrate for quality parity, or it gives you better quality for bitrate parity. So it's an informed choice. Your reason for not doing would be it costs you more, or the device doesn't play it back. So the interesting part today, there's actually reasonably broad support for HEVC. It's across the Apple ecosystem, because Apple stepped in and proudly flew the HEVC flag. And most smart TVs will also support HEVC, as well as many Android phones. So there's a good chunk of the addressable devices that are being reached by OTT today that can support HEVC. And it also shouldn't be a binary decision for people. It's not AVC or HEVC and that's it. We're entering a world right now. VVC just went to FDIS last week, which means it's now an approved standard. If Apple pick it up and it makes its way into smart TVs, then next year you're looking at a HEVC, a VVC, an EVC, a VP9, or an AVC decision. So you've got 5 codecs to juggle. And you might say, well, that's crazy. I can't encode all my assets to all 5. And that's true. That would be a foolish thing to do. But you should be intelligent about which assets you encode to which additional codecs. You want a dynamic system that's matching the devices that are coming in and actually playing your content with the volume of requests you're getting, because that's going to scale, that's your savings are going to scale based on the request volume, and then have a system that every 24 hours is juggling and manipulating your content archive to minimize the storage cost while maximizing user quality and minimizing delivery cost. And it's entirely possible.
But should I is there a certain set of my content that I should pre-encode with the HEVC so that it's permanently around?
That's up to you. I favor a system where we're going to need AVC as our baseline encode forever. I mean, people should accept that. It's how we get the broadest reach in the market. So I would take a MES file, encode it to AVC, and have it on storage. And then I would look at my viewer consumption. And I can tell which devices are coming in that could support HEVC that I'm giving my AVC asset to. And when that reaches a threshold, at which point I know the threshold being that the bandwidth savings I get by encoding HEVC are now greater than my additional cost of encoding that HEVC title. And then I would encode it to HEVC. And the same decision could be made for AV1 and VP9 and VVC if it comes to fruition.
Got it. Okay, very good. So this has been great. Now, I will include a link to your original presentation during Akamai Live. What should they be? What should they be looking for in that presentation? Because I think it's one long video.
It's a long video, but we went into how to reduce peak congestion during COVID times. But peak congestion without necessarily reducing user quality, or peak congestion without manipulating the content in any way. So it's 6 different strategies for doing that. And I think it's pretty interesting depending on whether you have access to your asset on origin storage, whether you can manipulate the manifest in any way, or to modify your player. And what if you can't do any of those? What can a CDN do for you as we deliver the asset to help reduce peak congestion?
Very good.
Look for our presentation there.
Yeah, I'll include a link to that when I post this piece. Will, as always, a pleasure talking with you.
Pleasure chatting with you too, Colin. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. This has been Colin Dixon with nScreenNoise.